When introducing new words to students, I like to write the word up on the board, make it presentable to the kids, and then ask them why they think it's a red word, because we really want them paying attention to the part that's not predictable, the part they can't sound out. So for instance, in the word friend, I would write that word up on the board and say, why is this a red word? And they would look at it, and most of them can see pretty easily that you can't hear the I. And so by getting the students to really pay attention to what's not regular will help them remember that one piece. And there are little tricks that you can use to help the students remember those words. So for instance, I might say, then I would explain to the students what is going on in that word and why it's irregular. So after they've discovered it, I would explicitly teach it. So in the word friend, the letter I is not pronounced. And then we would want the students to practice that word. And one way we can practice this using multisensory techniques is we can ask the students to trace and say the letter names on their desk. We could have them do it in sand. We could have them write it on paper. We could have them write it on the inside of their arm or their leg or on the carpet. So anywhere that is convenient and works in your classroom. So in other words, if they were doing the word friend, the students would trace and say the letter name, not the sound, F-R-I-E-N-D, friend. And if the word is longer, just like friend is, I would have them group it in kind of little chunks of 3 letters or 4 letters at a time, just like when you're remembering some sort of a code like your social security code or a phone number. Remembering it in chunks is easier for the brain. So again, if I were doing friend, instead of just saying all the letters and rattling them off all at once, you kind of make it a little bit of like a pattern, F-R-I-E-N-D, friend. A little bit of a pause in between there. I find that tends to help them. And then for first graders, what you would want to do is introduce groups of words for reading, but take your time more with the spelling. We'll get to that in a minute when we talk more about spelling red words, because the spelling is going to lag behind. They're going to be able to read many more red words than they'll be able to spell. The spelling is going to take quite some time. So depending on your students and whether they're struggling students, whether they're your typical kinds of students and don't have any learning issues, that will determine how many red words you would want to introduce. So for your typically developing first graders, that's anywhere from 2 to 5 words. If you're clustering them, like I said, with say 1, none, done, that would be certainly easier for them. So you want to cluster whatever you can. If you have students that are really struggling, it might be 1 word a week. Especially for students who have really poor phonemic awareness or students who have a diagnosed reading disability, learning these irregular words can be very challenging and they need a lot of practice, and you have to go very slowly. So when I introduce teaching students how to spell a new red word, I tend to go through a similar process. So the first thing I do is I introduce the word orally first. I don't show it to them right away. And I'll tell them what we're learning to spell. So I have a little script here to walk you through the steps. So if I were teaching the word said to students, I would just say, today we're going to learn how to spell the word said. And then I would ask them to count the sounds. How many sounds do you hear in said? And they count it on their fingers. S, d. So they hear 3 sounds. So I draw a line for each sound, or I could ask the students to do this. And then I say the sounds as I fill in the letters. And I'll say to the students, watch me. I'm going to write the word said on the lines to show which letters represent which sounds. And I want you to look to see something that you think is tricky. And then I would go ahead and I would write it. S, d. Then I would have the students look at it. And I would ask them, what's tricky about this word? And they would tell me, AI. That's the tricky part. That's the unexpected part. They hear but we're writing AI. We really want the students to attach the sound of the word with the letters making that sound. So this is a good way to really help them focus on that and hone in on it and reinforce the sequence. Then I would ask the students to practice spelling the word, and I would tell them to spell it. So they're saying the letter names, because remember, sounding it out could be tricky. Now, parts of it they could sound out, but if you have a red word, there's always at least one part that's tricky and you can't sound it out. So I would ask the students to take their fingers and trace either on their desk or on their arm, someplace, maybe on a piece of paper if I had the word said in front of them, and I would ask them to trace and say the letter names 3 times. So they would just simply do S-A-I-D, said, S-A-I-D, said, S-A-I-D, said. And that just helps to reinforce the order of those letters. And then I would ask the students to write it again. Now they're taking their pencil and they're writing said 3 more times. And then if I had time, I might dictate some sentences that day with the word said. If I didn't do it that day, certainly in a review lesson, I would absolutely dictate words, and I would make sure to include the newest red word or maybe the last 2 or 3 red words when I'm doing my sentence dictations.